On a stormy night, a nameless hero stepped from the shadows. When Callie Brooks found an overturned car on a lonely mountain road, she thought it was just a moment of mercy. She never expected the man she saved to change her fate, or that his powerful grandson would cross worlds to find her. Some encounters are written in fire, others in destiny. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. Rain battered the windshield in frantic sheets as Callie Brooks tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Wind whipped down the mountain road outside Silver Creek, Colorado, howling like a living thing. Her battered old delivery van groaned around each sharp curve, headlights barely piercing the thick curtain of rain. Exhausted after a long day delivering pastries for Hearthstone Bakery, Callie was finally nearing home. Then a flash of sparks sliced through the night, followed by a dim, flickering glow. She gasped, rounding a bend, and there it was, a car overturned on its side, balanced dangerously close to the broken guardrail. Smoke spiraled into the stormy sky, one of the car's headlights flickering weakly like the final breath of a dying firefly. Callie's heart leapt into her throat. Without thinking, she slammed on the brakes. The tires skidded, hydroplaning slightly, but she fought the van to a halt and hurled herself out into the rain. Icy water drenched her instantly, her jacket, her jeans, even her shoes were soaked through, but she sprinted toward the wreck. "Hello," she shouted over the storm's fury. "Can you hear me? Is anyone there?" A faint groan answered from within the car. She crouched by the shattered passenger side window and peered inside. Slumped across the seat was an elderly man, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. His chest rose and fell in shallow, fragile movements, and a seatbelt pinned him against the wreckage. "Oh no," Callie breathed, her voice shaking. "Don't worry, sir. I'm going to get you out." His eyelids fluttered, dazed, as he whispered, "Please, don't let me die here." Callie fought the fear rising in her chest. "You're not going to die," she promised fiercely. "Not tonight." She yanked on the door, once, twice, it wouldn't budge. Frustrated, she screamed into the rain. Searching the ground frantically, her fingers closed around a bent metal rod, probably debris from the crash itself. Planting her feet, she jammed the rod between the door and frame and heaved with every ounce of strength she had. The metal groaned but refused to move. She screamed again, louder, then backed up and smashed the driver's side window instead. Glass showered down, slicing her palm, but she ignored the pain. She fumbled for the seatbelt release, her bloody fingers slipping. Finally, it clicked free. The acrid smell of gasoline reached her nose just as a low crackling noise grew beneath the mangled hood. "No, no, no," she whispered urgently. A spark ignited. Smoke thickened. With adrenaline surging through her, Callie hooked her arms under the man's shoulders and dragged him out, inch by inch, her boots sliding in the mud. "Come on," she grunted. "Come on, please." They had barely dragged themselves 10 feet away when the car exploded with a deafening roar. An enormous fireball lit up the mountainside, sending shards of debris flying into the night. Heat seared Callie's back. She instinctively curled her body protectively over the elderly man. When the ringing in her ears finally faded, she could hear nothing but the ragged sound of her own breathing and his weak, rasping voice. You saved me," he murmured. "You're not safe yet," Callie panted, her chest heaving. "Stay awake, okay? Please." She sprinted back to her van, threw open the rear doors, and grabbed a thick picnic blanket she usually kept for delivery breaks. Wrapping it around the injured man, she pressed the fabric against the gash on his forehead and half-carried, half-dragged him to the passenger seat. Sliding behind the wheel, Callie whispered, "Come on, baby. Don't fail me now." The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. She drove down the twisting mountain road, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, her heart hammering against her ribs. The man, Walter, as he had murmured, drifted in and out of consciousness. Callie kept talking to him, mile after mile. "You're doing great, Walter. Stay with me. We're almost there." At last, the glowing sign of Silver Creek Medical Center pierced the darkness. Callie swerved into the emergency bay and slammed her palm against the horn until medical staff rushed outside, squinting through the downpour. "Emergency trauma," she shouted. "Male, late 70s, head injury, possible internal bleeding. Pulled from a car wreck." Nurses and doctors swarmed around the van, pulling Walter onto a stretcher. Callie staggered back, soaked to the bone, her bloodied hands trembling. A nurse turned to her. "Are you family?" Callie shook her head. "No, just someone who found him." "Name for the report?" the nurse pressed. Callie hesitated, then looked down. It doesn't matter. Just help him. Without waiting for a response, she turned away, slipping back into the rain, her figure swallowed by the night. She didn't expect anyone to look for her. She didn't expect to see him again. Inside the bright emergency room, chaos unfolded, vitals were shouted, monitors beeped, stretchers clattered across slick floors. Callie stood on the fringe of it all, dripping water onto the tile, her jacket clinging heavily to her frame. Blood from her cut hand dripped steadily, ignored. She barely felt it. Another nurse approached. "Ma'am, we really need your name." "I'm not family," Callie interrupted softly but firmly. "Just save him." The nurse hesitated, reading the quiet ferocity in her eyes, then nodded. Callie offered a faint, weary smile before slipping back toward the exit. Outside, the storm had slackened to a cold drizzle. She climbed into her rattling van, rested her forehead against the steering wheel, and let herself breathe for the first time in what felt like hours. She didn't know if Walter would live, but she knew she had given him a chance, and sometimes that was all anyone could do. The drive home through Silver Creek was silent except for the occasional rattle of the van's loose bumper. Callie's hand throbbed where glass had cut her palm, but she barely noticed. At her tiny apartment above the Sunrise Motel, she peeled off her soaked clothes, cleaned her wounds clumsily, and collapsed onto the bed. The mattress sagged under her, the air cold and damp, but none of it mattered. Tomorrow, she would get up early and head back to Hearthstone Bakery. She would slip on her apron, hide the bandages under gloves, and knead dough until her arms ached. No one would ask where she had been. No one would know. Callie liked it that way. Kindness, she believed, was meant to be invisible. That night, she dreamed of fire, rain, and a voice whispering, "Don't let me die here." She woke before sunrise, heavy-hearted but determined, and went to work as if nothing had happened. That afternoon, as Callie navigated her delivery route, she passed the curve where it had all happened. No sign remained of the wreck, the twisted car, the smoke, the scorched earth. The rain had washed it clean, as if it had never happened. The mountain whispered only with falling leaves and the distant rumble of water down the cliffs. Life returned to its quiet rhythm, early mornings, silent deliveries, long nights. But sometimes when the streets of Silver Creek grew especially still, Callie's mind drifted back to Walter, the desperate fear in his eyes, the weight of him against her arms. She didn't go back to Silver Creek Medical Center. She didn't call to check. Some things she believed were meant to stay unnamed. Kindness was a choice, not a story. What she didn't know was that far away, in a high-rise office beyond the mountains, someone had already begun a search. Someone who refused to let the girl who disappeared into the storm remain a mystery. The first thing Walter Carter saw when he opened his eyes was the blinding white ceiling of a hospital room. The second was the soft drip of an IV. The third was the gentle smile of a nurse leaning over him. "You're awake, Mr. Carter," she said warmly. "You're very lucky." Walter blinked, struggling to remember. Pain flared in his ribs, his temples. Then the memories came. Flashes of metal, smoke, and her. "The girl," he rasped, voice dry as paper. "Where is she?" The nurse frowned. "I'm sorry, who?" "The young woman," Walter whispered. "She saved me. She pulled me out." The nurse's face softened. "Sir, you were alone when they brought you in. Whoever helped you." She didn't leave a name. Walter closed his eyes, a rare tear escaping down his temple. She hadn't waited for thanks. She had simply disappeared. "She saved more than my life," Walter murmured. "She saved my soul." 3 days later, Lucas Carter descended the steps of his private jet into the gray drizzle of a Silver Creek morning. He ignored the buzz of texts and corporate emails lighting up his phone. Only one message mattered, the voicemail his grandfather had left after waking. "She pulled me from the fire, Lucas. A stranger. She didn't ask who I was. She didn't care about my money. She risked everything. You have to find her." Walter Carter had never been a sentimental man. He was sharp, iron-willed, battle-forged in the boardroom and in life. But Lucas had heard something in his voice that he hadn't heard in years. Fragility and certainty. Lucas wasn't sure how to find a woman who didn't want to be found. But he would try, because this wasn't about obligation. It was about honor. Lucas's first stop was Silver Creek Medical Center. Doctors there told him the basic facts. Walter had sustained a concussion, broken ribs, and minor internal bleeding, but he was expected to recover fully. The wreck had occurred on a remote stretch of road about an hour outside of town. The emergency staff had no name for the woman who brought him in. No security footage? Lucas asked, frowning. The receptionist shook her head apologetically. The storm knocked out the exterior cameras a few weeks ago. But she had to drive him here, he insisted. What about her car? A nurse piped up, I saw it. An old blue delivery van. Banged up on the left side. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, Lucas and his security team pulled hours of grainy traffic footage from highway checkpoints near Silver Creek. Hours later, they found it, a battered blue van, headlights sputtering, pulling into the hospital entrance. The plate was half obscured, but not completely. By dawn, they had traced it to a small, cozy bakery tucked at the edge of town, Hearthstone Bakery. The next morning, Lucas Carter pushed open the door of Hearthstone Bakery, not knowing exactly what he would find. The smell of fresh bread, cinnamon, and warm sugar hit him instantly, stirring a memory he couldn't quite place. The place was modest, worn wooden counters, handwritten menus on chalkboards, ivy crawling around the windows. A brass bell above the door jingled softly as he stepped inside. Behind the counter stood a young woman, dusting flour from her hands onto a faded apron. She looked up, startled by his entrance. Her eyes were wide, cautious, but kind. Lucas's heart gave an odd jolt. Even though the security footage had been blurry, even though he had only glimpsed her soaked silhouette through the windshield, he knew. It was her. Hi, she said, voice uncertain. Can I help you? Lucas stepped closer, trying to steady himself. I'm looking for someone, he said carefully. A woman who drove my grandfather to the hospital after a crash one stormy night. She saved his life when no one else stopped. He's been asking for her ever since. The color drained slightly from her cheeks. Her fingers stilled against the counter. Was it you? Lucas asked softly. Callie Brooks looked down, twisting the hem of her apron between her fingers. I didn't do it for thanks, she said quietly. Lucas nodded. I'm not here just to offer thanks, he replied gently. I'm here because my grandfather, Walter Carter, says you didn't just save his life. You saved his heart. Callie's breath caught in her throat. Lucas's voice softened. He told me that in all his long life, through wars, through losses, through building empires, he hadn't felt that kind of human kindness in decades. He said you reminded him of who he used to be. The bakery hummed with the low sound of an old refrigerator. A neon open sign buzzed faintly in the window. I didn't even know his name, Callie whispered. You know it now, Lucas said. And he knows yours matters. Neither of them knew what to call this feeling blooming quietly between them. But both understood it was real. Some rescues didn't just heal wounds, they planted something new. Lucas Carter was no stranger to solving puzzles. In the world of boardrooms, billion-dollar mergers, and high-stakes negotiations, he always found a way. But this was different. He wasn't chasing profits or outcomes. He was chasing a ghost, the girl who had risked her life for a stranger without ever asking for anything in return. My grandfather said she didn't even ask my name, Walter had told him, voice hoarse from injury. She pulled me from fire and then disappeared. Lucas couldn't shake the memory of how Walter stared out the hospital window afterward, quiet, almost reverent, a rare vulnerability softening the man who had once seemed unbreakable. Lucas had worked backward from the few fragile clues, the storm-blurred security footage, the dented blue van, the faint outline of a young woman soaked in rain but unshakable in resolve. It had taken nights combing traffic camera logs, reaching out to local businesses, narrowing the list down. And finally, Hearthstone Bakery. Finally her. Most leads had gone nowhere. Old vans sold off. Wrong drivers. Courier services from towns 2 counties over. But when a weary bakery owner had mentioned a battered blue delivery van and a young woman named Callie Brooks, Lucas had known. He had jumped into his SUV without hesitation, heading straight for Silver Creek's town edge. The bakery was tucked beneath a canopy of climbing ivy and fairy lights. The wooden tables were scratched and sun-warmed. A record player crooned softly in the corner. When Lucas opened the door, he saw her first from behind, rolling her sleeves up, brushing flour off her forearms, her braids swinging lightly down her back. He almost forgot how to breathe. Mia, the bakery owner, called from the back room. Help the gentleman? She turned and there she was. Not a blurred silhouette. Not a desperate figure in the storm. A real, living woman. Hi, Callie said again, brushing her hands nervously on her apron. What can I get for you? Lucas stepped closer, lowering his voice. Do you drive the blue delivery van outside? He asked. She blinked, surprised. Yeah, for the bakery. Why? He hesitated just a moment before asking. About 2 weeks ago, during a storm, did you pull an elderly man from a burning car on a mountain road? Her whole body tensed. She began, swallowing hard. How do you know about that? Lucas's voice was steady but gentle. Because that man is my grandfather. Walter Carter. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. He's alive? She whispered, almost too afraid to hope. Lucas smiled, warmth breaking through his guarded expression. Because of you. Callie stared at Lucas, a maelstrom of emotions crossing her face, shock, disbelief, guilt. I didn't think he'd survive, she whispered. He was so hurt. You got him to the hospital, Lucas said firmly. You gave him a chance no one else did. Callie looked away, her voice low. I wasn't trying to be a hero. Lucas took a step closer. You weren't trying to be anything but good. And that's exactly why you are. She laughed softly, almost bitterly. Your grandfather must have hit his head harder than they thought. Lucas smiled. Maybe, but I've never seen him more clear. For a long moment, they just stood there, two strangers linked by one impossible night. Callie's hands trembled slightly as she wiped the counter clean, pretending to focus on a stubborn flour smudge. She wasn't used to being seen. Not like this. Callie studied the man before her. He wasn't what she had expected from a CEO. He wasn't in a designer suit. He wasn't flanked by assistants or bodyguards. He was just a man standing in a small-town bakery looking at her like she was the most important person in the world. You really came all this way to find me? She asked finally. I had to, Lucas said simply. Not because of who I am. Because of what you did. For the first time since the night of the crash, Callie felt something shift inside her, not fear, not exhaustion, but something warm, something cautious and new. Later that evening, as she packed up the last of the day's orders, Lucas waited by the side of her old van. Would you have dinner with me? He asked, hands in his pockets, looking every bit as nervous as she felt. Callie tilted her head, skeptical but curious. Why? Lucas shrugged, a small, hopeful smile tugging at his mouth. Because I'd like to know the woman who saved my family. She hesitated for a heartbeat. Okay, she said. They met that night at Maple Leaf Diner, a cozy place with cracked leather booths, laminated menus, and pie displays spinning lazily under glass. Callie ordered grilled cheese and tomato soup. Lucas stuck to black coffee and a turkey sandwich. At first, they talked about simple things, the weather, the bakery, the storms that rolled over the mountains. But slowly, the conversation deepened. I lost my mom when I was 8, Callie said, tracing the rim of her glass with her fingertip. Cancer. My dad didn't make it much longer after that. Drifted away, disappeared. Lucas listened quietly without pity or interruption. I bounced around foster homes, she continued. Learned to work early. Deliveries, dishwashing, anything. People were kind sometimes. Mostly, I learned to keep moving. She looked down at her hands, the tiny scars only someone like her would notice. When I saw your grandfather, she said softly, I couldn't just leave him there. I knew what it felt like to be left behind. Lucas's heart tightened in his chest. You didn't just help, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You saved him. I'm not looking for money, Callie said quickly, almost defensively. I don't want rewards or scholarships or whatever it is people like you usually offer. Lucas raised his hands in surrender, a small smile playing at his lips. I wasn't going to offer any of that. Callie blinked, caught off guard. I just wanted to meet the woman who gave me back my grandfather, Lucas said simply. That's all. Callie didn't know how to respond to that. No one had ever looked at her like that before. Not with admiration, not with quiet gratitude. Most people saw her as temporary, invisible. But Lucas Carter, he saw her. The next morning, Callie was kneading dough in the back of Hearthstone Bakery when she heard the bell above the door chime. Expecting a customer, she wiped her hands on her apron and walked out front. Her breath caught in her throat. There, leaning on a cane but smiling through teary eyes, was Walter Carter. Walter looked thinner, paler than she remembered, but very much alive. And when his eyes found hers, they lit up with something fierce and grateful. I told him, Walter rasped, nodding toward Lucas who hovered protectively behind him. I told him I needed to come. Callie froze behind the counter, unsure whether to move forward or to vanish. Walter didn't wait. He shuffled closer and reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly firm. You don't know me, he said hoarsely. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't even know my name. But you ran into fire for a stranger. Tears blurred his vision and Callie's throat tightened. I built companies, Walter continued, his voice shaking, lost friends, raised this stubborn grandson. He shot Lucas a fond, teasing look, but no one has ever saved me like you did. The bakery fell into stunned silence, customers and staff alike watching the scene unfold. Callie could barely breathe. I didn't do it for this, she whispered. I wasn't expecting anything. And that's exactly why it means everything, Walter said. Lucas stepped up beside his grandfather, resting a steadying hand on Walter's shoulder. She's the reason you're still my grandfather today, Lucas said quietly. And she deserves to know that she belongs, no matter where she came from. Callie blinked back tears, feeling something shift inside her, something vast and terrifying and beautiful. For so long, she had convinced herself that her good deeds would disappear into silence. That kindness was something you gave without ever expecting to see it returned. But here they were. They had found her. The days that followed were strange and wonderful. Lucas started appearing at Hearthstone Bakery more often, not in pressed suits, but in jeans and rolled-up sleeves. At first, Callie told herself it was coincidence. Politeness, maybe. But the way he lingered by the counter, the way he offered to help load deliveries, the way he listened to her stories, it was something more. And it never once felt like charity. One morning, as Callie loaded a tray of muffins into the back of her van, Lucas crouched beside the battered front tire. "You know your front left is almost bald, right?" he asked, inspecting it with a frown. "I know," Callie muttered. "Just trying to stretch it a few more weeks." The next day, Lucas showed up carrying a brand new replacement tire. Not a flashy gift. Not an expensive show. Just a safe, sturdy tire already delivered, already installed. "I watched a tutorial," he said when Callie gawked at him. "Don't look so impressed." After that, he started riding along for deliveries. He claimed it was a break from corporate chaos. But Callie knew better. During those long drives through Silver Creek, Lucas learned everything about her, the way she missed her mom when baking apple pies, how she collected old postcards from thrift stores, how she always walked the same winding trail in Riverbend Park every Sunday afternoon. He never interrupted, never judged, just listened as if every word she spoke mattered more than anything else. One Thursday morning, while making a routine delivery downtown, Callie spotted a figure huddled beneath the overpass, frail, soaked to the skin, shivering against the bitter chill. An elderly woman wrapped in garbage bags and newspaper blinked up at the world through swollen, tear-reddened eyes. "Wait here," Callie told Lucas, already grabbing a loaf of bread and a thermos of warm tea from the passenger seat. "Callie," he began, reaching for her arm. "I'll be quick," she said, already moving. She knelt in front of the woman, offering the food and the drink with gentle hands and soft words. The woman recoiled at first, but when Callie smiled and placed the food on the ground beside her, she burst into broken sobs. Lucas watched from the van, heart twisting. No cameras. No applause. Just one human soul reaching quietly for another. In that moment, watching her crouch in the mud and give comfort with the same tenderness she had given his grandfather, something inside Lucas shifted, something that would never shift back. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills of Silver Creek, Callie and Lucas sat on a bench outside the bakery, nursing lukewarm tea from paper cups. Lucas turned to her, studying her profile in the fading light. "Do you always do that?" he asked softly. "Do what?" "Help people," he clarified, without thinking twice. Callie shrugged, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I know what it's like to be cold, to be scared, to feel invisible." Lucas nodded, falling silent for a long moment. "You make the world softer," he said finally, his voice low. Callie blinked, surprised. "You don't just see people," Lucas continued. "You feel them. And somehow you carry their hurt without letting it crush you." A slow smile tugged at her lips. "That's not something most people notice." "I'm not most people," Lucas said quietly, his gaze locking with hers. "And neither are you." Something bloomed inside Callie's chest, something warm and terrifying and new. They didn't touch. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. Love, sometimes, didn't arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it crept in on shared silences, on steady glances over crumpled paper cups, on the way someone saw you when the world had taught you to hide. But peace, Callie learned, was a fragile thing. The storm came quietly, without warning. It started with a blurry photo, a tabloid shot of her stepping out of Hearthstone Bakery, apron dusted with flour, Lucas holding the door for her. It was enough. Enough to light a match. Unknown girl saves billionaire heir's grandfather. From Dota Dynasty, who is she really? Within hours, Callie's quiet life was obliterated. Reporters camped outside the bakery. Paparazzi trailed her battered van. Commenters dug through her forgotten foster records and high school blogs. The headlines turned vicious. A tragic past or a convenient one? Innocent angel or calculated opportunist? Callie stopped checking her phone. But the bakery staff couldn't help showing her the worst of it, thinking she deserved to know. One article claimed she had faked the entire rescue, that Walter Carter had already called for help and she was just the first to stumble onto the scene. It crushed her. One night, after dropping off a tray of scones at a late-night diner, she sat in her van in the empty Riverbend grocery parking lot and cried until her ribs ached. The kindness she had given freely was now a weapon turned against her. The peace she had found was shattered. She stopped answering Lucas's calls, not because she blamed him, but because she couldn't bear the thought of being the reason his name was dragged through the mud. She wasn't a Carter. She didn't belong in his world. So she made a decision. One suitcase. One-way bus ticket to a dusty town 3 states away. She left a note taped to the bakery fridge. "Thank you for everything. Please tell Lucas I'm sorry." But Callie Brooks never boarded the bus. The next morning, her name was on every screen in the country, not because of scandal, but because Lucas Carter had stepped into the spotlight. He stood alone at a press conference outside the Carter Corp headquarters, facing a sea of cameras and reporters. No tie. No polish. Just raw, unvarnished truth. "I've stayed quiet long enough," Lucas said, his voice carrying over the crowd. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters leaned in. "Her name is Callie Brooks," Lucas continued. "She saved my grandfather's life. She pulled him from a burning car, risked her own, and disappeared before we could even say thank you." He let that sink in. "She didn't want money. She didn't want fame. And now, because I care about her, you've treated her like she's something to tear apart." He paused, breathing hard. "She doesn't need to belong to my world," he said, "because I choose to live in hers." A stunned silence filled the plaza. Then, slowly, applause began, scattered at first, then building until it rolled across the gathered crowd. By nightfall, the headlines softened. The billionaire and the baker. Love beyond the headlines. Maybe we got it wrong. Far away, holed up in a worn motel room outside Silver Creek, Callie's phone buzzed again. She answered it with trembling hands. "Why did you do that?" she asked, when Lucas's voice came through the line. "Because love," he said simply, "is louder than lies." For the first time in days, Callie let herself believe. Maybe, just maybe, it was. A year later, the garden behind Walter Carter's country home had been transformed. Once a patch of weedy grass, it now bloomed with wildflowers, ivy, and strands of soft lights. Under a handmade wooden arch crafted by Walter himself, stubborn knees and all, stood Callie in a flowing ivory dress she had found at a vintage shop. No designer labels. No heavy jewels. Just honesty. Her hair was pinned back with sprigs of jasmine, and in her trembling hands she held a bouquet of flowers Lucas had picked that very morning, insisting, "The best ones don't come from a store." Across from her stood Lucas, in a simple gray suit, his eyes never once leaving hers. And between them, clutching a teddy bear and wearing a crooked flower crown, stood little Maisie, the tiny girl they had found 8 months earlier, abandoned and scared after a roadside accident. Love, Callie had learned, was rarely planned. But it was always worth fighting for. The guests were few. Close friends, bakery staff, neighbors who had become family. Near the front row sat Maisie, her legs swinging happily beneath her seat, her teddy bear clutched tight against her chest. She had been through so much, and yet here she was, beaming up at them. When the officiant began the ceremony, Maisie wriggled free from her chair and ran toward the altar. Lucas bent down to scoop her into his arms, his smile breaking wide. "Daddy," she whispered, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "Are you marrying Mommy now?" Lucas chuckled, tears bright in his eyes. "That's exactly what I'm doing, sweetheart." The crowd laughed and wiped their eyes. As Lucas passed Maisie to Callie, the three of them stood together beneath the archway, family, stitched together by grace and second chances. The ceremony was simple. Callie, her voice steady but thick with emotion, spoke first. "You found me when I didn't believe I deserved to be found. You saw me, not my past, not my fear, but me." Lucas, his voice rough, answered. "You showed me that strength isn't about boardrooms or victories. It's about love without conditions. And I want to spend my life earning the gift you gave me." When they kissed, the guests erupted into cheers. Walter wiped a tear from his weathered cheek, leaning on his cane. He turned to his sister, who sat beside him, and whispered, "He found her." "Found who?" she asked, smiling. "My angel," Walter said quietly. "The one who pulled me from the fire. And now she's his angel too." Later that evening, as twilight spread across the hills, the garden behind the Carter house was alive with laughter and golden light. Long tables sagged with homemade food. Children chased bubbles across the lawn. Old records played soft tunes through a vintage speaker. In the middle of it all, barefoot and breathless, Callie spun Maisie in wide circles, the little girl's laughter soaring into the evening sky. Lucas watched them from a few steps away, his heart so full he thought it might burst. This wild, imperfect, shining moment was what he had been chasing all along. Not boardrooms. Not headlines. Not legacy. Family. Love. Callie caught his gaze, her cheeks flushed, her eyes radiant. She crossed the grass to him, slid her arms around his waist, and rested her head against his chest. "I never thought this could be my life," she whispered. Lucas held her tighter. "The world lied to you," he said. "You were always meant for joy." From his seat on the porch, Walter Carter lifted a glass in their direction. "To Callie," he said softly to himself. "The woman who saved me and then saved him." Above them, stars began to prick the darkening sky, one by one. It wasn't money or power that had transformed their lives. It wasn't fame. It was a simple act of courage born on a rainy mountain road when one stranger refused to walk away. Where once there had been wreckage, now there was light. Where there had been only survival, now there was family. And where there had been fear, now there was love. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey of courage, compassion, and unexpected love. She thought she was just giving a stranger a ride to the hospital, not knowing his grandson, a CEO, would search for her and that it would change all their lives forever. This story reminds us that the smallest choices we make can spark the greatest transformations, not only in others but within ourselves. From a rain-soaked mountain road to a garden full of light, Callie Brooks showed us that true heroism is quiet, selfless, and rooted in love. Lucas Carter showed us that when we choose people for who they are, not where they come from, something extraordinary can grow. If the story touched your heart, made you smile, or reminded you of the goodness still left in the world, we invite you to share it. Share your own acts of kindness, the moments that changed you or that you gave to someone else. Every act, no matter how small, carries the power to light up the darkness. Let's keep telling stories that matter, stories of hope, of connection, of bravery. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in the quiet power of humanity. And thank you for carrying this story forward. And so, the story of Callie, Lucas, Walter, and Maisie doesn't truly end, it simply begins again. A life built on a single, selfless act. A family built from strangers. A future built from second chances. May we all find the courage to love without hesitation, to act with kindness even when no one is watching, and to trust that even the darkest storms can lead us home. Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting for your light.